Sit down.
We'll call the Caribou Council workshop to order. Tonight's workshop was talking about the Caribou Housing Agency, Section 8 housing. And I guess one of the reasons that we're holding this is to determine what reasons we have a Caribou Housing Agency when we don't have public housing like Port Fairfield or Presque Isle, and what benefit is it to the city of Caribou to be doing it. So I'm reading some of the information down here, and already I see something that I didn't realize. It says HUD administration deposit. HUD paid $113,000 to the housing agency to cover the agency's expenses. $70,000 is to pay the city of Caribou to cover benefits and salaries. $20,000 was paid out in office expenses, training and software maintenance. So is there some allowance for the office expenses here? Or is that just paper and that they're using, or is that
They
part of rent or utilities, or what is it?
They pay for all of their office supplies and everything with these funds. They reimburse the city some for the internet expenses or the internet bill. This is higher than it was in 2014. I think Jim's able to talk to the numbers a bit more specifically. And if we want Jim to do that.
Yeah, I kind of think we should, because I think that's one of the things that interests most of us is how are these numbers derived, and is this the maximum number that HUD pays in a year? Is it based on populations, or what?
Okay. I'm Jim Otis. I think I met some of you a couple of years ago.
Yes, you did.
A similar thing. But what HUD does is they pay you a fee for leasing each unit. And it's roughly $60 per unit per month. And there's 193 vouchers. Those 2,316 unit months times $60 is a gross fee. And what has happened is through Congress and the sequestration is that they've reduced the fee to they take 80%. I think it's being funded like at 80% now of the $60 per unit per month, and that's what they give you. Now, that's gone up because it was down as low as 67%, and the fees that we got were like $78,000 just 3 years ago maybe.
Yeah.
They went up this previous year to $103,000, and this year they're about $113,000. So HUD has funded a higher percentage. It goes back to domestic programs and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what we get. And this fee that we get is for administering the program. And we're free to use that to pay for the direct expenses and indirect expenses of the housing voucher program, which includes reimbursing the city for their internet and all sorts of other things. And the software expenses, the direct expenses include software that we have specifically to run the program and everything. So it contributes. Now we're up at a level where we're contributing the cost of we're getting a fee that's greater than the cost, so to speak. But it's covering all the costs and everything now, very, very nicely.
But this is the fee that is paid, this 113. It isn't what the expenses are that we put in.
The expenses that we put in.
Yeah, I'm saying like this $20,000. Do we have to account for where that $20,000 has gone?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so, do we charge phones and,
This is all, none of these $20,000 in expenses ever touch the city expenses. They're all the housing department. They have their own checkbook. They've got their own budget for these
Oh, yeah, the
things.
funds are all segregated and
Okay.
everything. There's no negative impact to the city whatsoever. It's self-funded. It's like an independent agency. It's like a separate housing authority.
It's self-funded other than it doesn't pay rent or heating or utilities or anything else.
Well, that's the way we do the books on the housing program is we categorize something for rent and everything, but the city gets this lump sum of $70,000, which goes towards the salaries and the benefits and everything else. It's more than enough to cover that. So the city does get, in fact, they probably got $4,000 or $5,000 more than what the actual cost that they, for the people on the payroll. So
yeah, it would be close. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happens if the housing agency doesn't spend like the $20,000, for instance? Does that go into the reserve account for the housing agency? Does that, or is that just not?
It's a reserve on the books of the housing program, yes, which can be used in the future. Yep.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions on that part of this, or?
I will say the housing in question about the Fort Fairfield and Presque Isle have separate housing authorities. I mean, they have units in the ground called low rent public housing,
Yeah,
and they also have Section 8 vouchers, just like we do here. You had the option some years ago, and I didn't, when I became the accountant here, I didn't ask for a copy of the annual contributions contract or the documents connected with that, where you've got set up. But you have the option of being either, setting up a complete separate housing authority at the time, back in the 70s, or being a component unit of the city. And because there was some kind of, someone was telling me this in the last day or two about the background, came through the community development block program or something. It was some kind of program that ended up evolving into this program. And you decided, because of the interest of efficiency, rather than setting up a whole housing authority, because they didn't give you an allocation of low rent public housing units, you only had the Section 8 vouchers, that it would be most efficient to just have it as an arm of the city. And I think it is. I think that's was the right choice, frankly. Looking back at it, it's the only component unit that we do out of our office. Most everyone has low rent public housing, so they have separate housing authorities.
Previous to the city, previous to it being an arm of the city, it was a part of the Urban Renewal Authority from back in the 60s and 70s. When that
Yeah, when they were tearing down the
Right.
block here and everything, I remember. Yeah.
so if the city determined that there was no benefit to us to be running this, where would it be handled from?
It would not be eliminated, it would be transferred
Yeah.
probably to an area housing authority or housing authority.
So it could go to Fort Fairfield or to Presque
Or
Isle?
split between them, or administered by Maine State Housing Authority. And they would have to set up their own office, field office here, and deal with it out of an office or something.
Yeah.
Put somebody physically here.
If I may. From the research that I have read, if you were to close the Caribou Housing Agency Department, the vouchers would be probably most likely split up between Fort Fairfield and Presque Isle. Maine State Housing would probably have to come into this jurisdiction, but they will not set up an office, because they just closed all their local agencies, except they pulled out of their Section 8 people out of Presque Isle, out of Biddeford, all of those, and they're all out of Augusta. The
Oh, that's
biggest-
right, they did. They
Correct.
did that a few years ago.
Yes. The biggest thing that you would lose here in Caribou is the customer service, besides 2 employees. Customer service is a very big aspect with our agency. We have families that come in every day to pick up a landlord listing that we publish, just not for Section 8, just for anybody looking for a landlord in the area, names and phone numbers. We have that on the website as well. They're looking for applications for Section 8. We have people coming in and getting job listings that Sue publishes every week from the Career Center. We have people coming in and looking for information on how to become a landlord, tips, ideas, who to contact for tenant legal issues, because they don't know. We have a lot of families that right here in Caribou that don't have transportation to Presque Isle to Fort Fairfield. So if you were to close us down, they would have no way to get to Presque Isle, except by bus, which is maybe 1-2 days a week. We have some people, we have a couple families on the program that are dyslexic due to their disabilities. So if Presque Isle or Fort Fairfield were to take over this area, most likely they would do their paperwork by mail. Well, that family wouldn't be able to read it. Those families come into our office. Sue and I take the day, we make appointments, we sit down with them. The other day she was helping someone just off the street tweak a resume. They've got nothing to do with Section 8. We do inspections for Section 8. I also like to think that's also helping the code enforcement office out, as I was explaining to Jim the other day. As we drive around, we're looking for the ordinances the city has on the 911 numbers. Years ago, when I used to see someone's house with no number, I used to go see Steve Wentworth and say, hey, this house has got no number, and send them a letter. So we kind of worked hand in hand. We also work hand in hand with the Caribou Police Department. Section 8 participants, we do criminal background checks. No one on Section 8 is a lifetime registered sex offender. That is HUD's rule. They have nothing to do with methamphetamine. That is HUD's mandatory rule.
But all this stuff would be done if it was handled by one of the other places, correct?
But you would lose your customer
That's all part of the
service.
program.
You would lose your customer service. Your families that are used to coming in here and getting an answer, because they know they can get an answer here. A lot of families won't go to Prescott. They won't go to Fort Fairfield because they don't have the transportation. They don't have the means.
We have, excuse me,
That's
so
all right.
we have some participants too who are housebound and we have to go to
And we
them,
go
to
to
their
them.
homes and do their annuals and interims.
And I guess that was my next question is, if we didn't have it here, how are things like the inspections and everything else, how would they be done?
That I couldn't tell you. Those agencies would take it over, but I can't guarantee they're gonna handle their inspections the same way as we do. Not all housing authorities look for GFCI outlets like we do. We do it as a safety issue. Not all housing authorities look for graspable handrails, safety issue that we do.
But aren't those things that are in the program that
No.
are required that you look for?
No, HUD has a very basic, HUD has rules, but they don't always cover everything. For example, one of the rules that HUD says, if my piece of paper covers a hole in the wall, it passes inspection. We don't do that.
So in other words, I mean, putting it bluntly, we don't necessarily pay attention to HUD rules, we just do what we think is right?
No, we do HUD rules, but we also have the means of making those rules stricter.
Standards are higher.
Our standards are higher. Thank you.
I'm just curious as to how, so landlords have to meet more, you're making the landlords meet more than the HUD requirements?
They
In order to be
understand, we
eligible?
explained to them that we do request a GFCI outlet. If there is, we have a couple of landlords in town that have older houses. What they've done is if they have a GFCI outlet that can't be grounded, I just ask them to put a label, it's not grounded. Because I don't want that tenant to have false, I call it advertisement, that's not the word I want. I don't want them to think that that outlet is grounded if they're gonna plug their toaster in there. It's protection. HUD is actually saying that all landlords have to make their outlets grounded now. But there again, some of these old houses stocks up here, it's hard to do. But we have a lot of landlords that work with us. We work with a lot of landlords on an open communication.
In other places, people usually have somebody, if it's a big agency, they have someone on their staff to do inspections, but the smaller agencies around don't have the resources for that. Some of them hire it out, 50 or 75 bucks per unit.
Yeah,
It's all done. I was asking Lisa today, I said, gee, who does your inspections? We do. So they have to do that themselves too.
We've
which
actually,
is quite a thing.
last fall, I actually just signed a contract with Maine State Housing Authority out of Augusta. If need be, if they need an inspector, they can hire us for $75 to do inspections for them. So far, nobody has. But I can tell you right now, I was up in the valley last year, talking to a couple of landlords that deal with Section 8. They wait on an average 2 to 3 weeks for an inspection for a new family to move in. If we got your paperwork today for you to come on Section 8, we're gonna either inspect your unit today or within the next 2 to couple of days, not 2 to 3 weeks. Landlord comes in today, a Section 8 family comes in today, we're gonna try to give you your answer today, if not within a couple of days. Some housing authorities, it's a couple of weeks. You have to, because they do everything by mail.
If you split up the vouchers between, what, you said Fort Fairfield and Presque Isle?
Prescott, yeah.
Okay, are those vouchers still for Caribou? Or would some
Oh,
of
yeah.
them go to Presque Isle or Fort Fairfield too? I mean, we
The
lose?
families would stay here
We
in their
wouldn't
current
lose
units,
any.
but their paperwork would be administered out of
Right,
Prescott
so-
or Fort Fairfield.
There would be no loss of
Revenue, people spending their money here.
Right, yeah, and getting there.
Of that 867,000, is that?
Right, yeah, we would not lose the vouchers. They wouldn't have to say, they wouldn't say, well, I'm gonna give this voucher instead of to Caribou, I'm gonna give it to
That I
Presque.
can't, that I can't answer,
Yeah.
because I can tell you right now, I've had some landlords that say if it wasn't for Caribou Housing Agency and the service they get, they wouldn't be doing Section 8. They would be shutting their property down.
So you think that somebody from Presque Isle's gonna say, let's give all this money to Caribou?
No,
No, no, you know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
that's what I'm wondering, yeah,
I don't,
exactly.
I would imagine that they would say,
Because
let's take care of Presque Isle guys first, and then we'll see if they
Yeah.
have any left over for Caribou.
that's a concern.
That's what I would think.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I
Off the
think,
record.
well, I think it's
Yeah.
also good when you have the personal contact, like you know the people, you know
Correct.
people here. You can work with the police department, you know who are the
So
sex
you
offenders.
take people to Presque Isle to do stuff, right?
Yeah, well,
Job
that's,
interviews
that's
and
through
job-
my FSS program.
Yeah.
I don't typically do that, but I was going to the Career Center the other day and I took one of my participants with me. While we were over there, she applied for 3 different jobs. She made contacts with some people over there and they're actually working with her on tweaking her resume and getting things done. So hopefully she'll be employed soon.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, it's a workshop, I'll let you.
Lisa,
Yes.
when people get their vouchers,
Yes.
they don't have to stay in Caribou. They can take their voucher and if
Go
they-
anywhere, go
and
to
go to
California.
Augusta with it or something, right?
Well, it depends. If the family's coming right off the waiting list, and if they lived in our jurisdiction, which is Caribou area and within 10 miles that we cover, they can take their voucher right there and go anywhere they want in the United States, as long as there's a housing authority.
If they were living here,
If they were living here when they initially applied,
correct.
but if they were not living in our jurisdiction when they initially applied, HUD states that they must live in our jurisdiction for an initial term of 1 year, which is a lease. Then they can take their voucher and go anywhere they want.
Okay, so they initially lived here.
Correct.
Okay. So, if you were on your applying for it, and they split these vouchers up, for convenience for your participants,
Mhm.
they may actually move out of Caribou to go to Presque Isle or to Fort, where, because of the transportation to
Correct.
getting in to do their follow-up applications, their additional paperwork down the road.
Correct, correct. We could end up losing citizens.
Right,
Correct,
and then that money wouldn't be here.
correct.
Okay.
The people that live here buy cigarettes and diapers and beer and food and.
Yeah.
Terrible.
The information I did give you is just, I didn't want to sit here and go. The information I gave you, the front page is just an overview of what Section 8 is. You'll notice down below our jurisdictions, I broke it up by towns, how many families we have leased up in each town. You'll notice 164 in Caribou, that's a lot. If you go on the inside, I give you information, some statistics on the waiting list, how many people we have on the program, or the waiting list that are families with children. Elderly families, that's anyone who's over 62. Families with disabilities. How many are within the income limits? And the income limits are on the back page. I ran out of room. Extremely low. 75% of our new applicants or new participants on the program have to fall within extremely low income guidelines for their family size. That's not much income if you look at it, and that's based on gross income.
Now, Lisa, you have 107 on the list now, waiting?
Correct. That is short.
Was it not that long ago that we couldn't even fill our, I say our requirements, but what we were allowed? That you were looking for families?
What happens
The fill
is, if we don't, we have to have 75% of our new applicants be extremely low, and if we don't have enough of those in a year, we get penalized from HUD. They can take our money or withhold some money. So what we were doing was recruitments to bring our waiting lists up. So we would have families on the waiting list in case we needed to meet that criteria. And we're always, I haven't advertised for a little while because right now we're all set for the next 2 or 3 months. But come summertime, I'll have to advertise again to make sure we have enough extremely low income families on the waiting list.
Just one more
Yes.
comment is that with my handling general assistance, I get assigned consent, they have signed consents, we can talk to each other. That's the first thing I get a client in my office. There, you go right upstairs before you leave this building and get an application. Go upstairs, and it may be a year down the road, but you need to get the process started.
And they do.
It is a tool. And so there is a very good working relationship between Sue, Lisa, and myself.
And that is one of the other things that you'll see, is I did put on the second page on the inside, the important roles that we play in lives and of our families, our participants on the program. And you'll see different distribution numbers of families that are already on, how many elderly, income, families, how many people are getting Social Security. Right now, we have 195 participant, or families, or 190, I'm sorry, that are just getting Social Security. Social Security disability. That's a lot of income. That's a lot of elderly, disabled that we have in this community that we're assisting. And if you happen to flip another page.
We talk about that on a regular basis here when we talk about raising taxes.
Yeah.
That's why we don't want to raise them.
Yeah, I understand,
Some don't understand that yet.
yeah.
I
And
do
you'll,
not.
I'll agree with you on that.
you'll see on the third page, the important role that we play in the community. That's the city of Caribou. Like I said, I don't want to sit here and go line by line, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Landlords, just in Caribou. We have 31 landlords out of 52 that participate, that rely on this money. Like I said, we actually have a couple of landlords that have already told me that if they were to close our office for whatever reason, they're not going to deal with Presque Isle and Fort Fairfield because they refuse to deal with them now. They won't accept Section 8. They'll just shut the properties down. We actually had, if you remember,
Why wouldn't they deal with it?
do you remember? I believe his name was Stillman Miller up on Collins Street. There was a house there a few years ago that was condemned. We had Section 8 properties in there. He didn't like the idea that he couldn't raise the rent up and beyond, which was affordable for our participants. When a family first comes on Section 8 or moves into a new unit, they cannot pay more than 40% of their monthly adjusted income during the initial term of the lease. He didn't like that. He didn't want to stay within the payment standards. So he kicked everybody out, and you saw what happened to the property. He let it go. And I believe it came tax acquired, and the city had to demo it. And I believe there was another one on Collins Street that had the same thing. We used to have Section 8 tenants in there, same thing. He did the same. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was another one.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why they wouldn't want to deal with Presque Isle. I mean, that was done here, that they were,
Unfortunately, that I can't answer.
yeah.
That I can't
I don't
answer.
know either why
Yeah.
landlords wouldn't want to deal with Presque Isle.
And one of the things I do want to brag about on the very back page in a blue box, HUD has a tool that they use every year, Section 8 Management Report. It's called CMAP. Gotta love our terminology. The way they do the reporting, it's a year behind. So 2014, we received 100 points. The highest points you can get. We're considered a high achiever. For a very small agency, we're one of the top agencies there are for this area. We may not have public housing. I have looked into public housing, I'll be honest with you, but HUD is no longer doing it. If you don't have it, they're no longer allowing you to recreate it.
All right, anyone else have any questions?
Back to the, just one question, you had the $60 per household. and you-
$60 per unit,
Per unit.
Per unit.
per unit per month.
And that's up to around 80% now, you said? Is it?
Yeah, so it's like $48 per unit per month.
And do you foresee that fluctuating one way or the other, big time dropping back to 60, or?
I don't think it's gonna drop back. down.
Works like revenue sharing in our state.
Yeah, I'm just,
They publish a figure what it should be, but then they
It's like
just
a
keep
crystal ball
giving
thing.
you a percentage this time.
The government, God knows what happens down in Washington. But I think that an 80% figure is reasonable. I mean, from what we've heard, that I think 80%, 79, 80% seems to be what they're gonna put in the budget the next year and stuff like that. So hopefully it's for the intermediate term, it's gonna be somewhat stable. If they paid us what they should, I mean, we'd be golden. I mean, we'd be,
absolutely.
I mean,
What do you think the opportunities would be for the full $60 if they actually budgeted by appropriation instead of doing an omnibus every year?
I'm not politically astute in reacting to that, but what does that mean? I
They
mean,
got 12 or 13 appropriations that they're supposed to fund and pass a budget for individually each year, and HUD probably falls in underneath one of those, okay?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So if you're budgeting by your
VA.
appropriation or by your agency,
Yeah.
instead of just putting it all in one pile, all right, and saying, here you go, and that's what they've done for the last 5 or 6, if not longer.
Yeah,
So some of that's gotta get lost in that part of it too, because you're not looking at each individual budget the way that you're supposed to.
Right.
To see that the needs are suffering a little,
Right.
okay?
That's right, because HUD is with VA.
Right.
I think I.
Yes, that's right,
They
yeah.
put that together with them.
Yeah.
And then they just do a cut and slash, I guess, of the,
Right, so somebody else under the VA administration might get a little bit of HUD's money because they need it supposedly more than HUD. Whereas if they're looking at the budgets under each appropriation in each agency versus the way that they're doing it today, you might have a better chance of getting fully funded or closer to fully funded than 80%.
right.
Okay.
But they did, in low rent, of course, vouchers are a big program across the country. Low rent public housing has operating subsidy. They did a whole Harvard study of exactly what it would cost and what the subsidy should be. And for many years, we get 100% of the subsidy for low rent. And all of a sudden, Congress cut it, and it's about 85% of what Harvard came up with for what you really need for the housing authorities. And vouchers isn't far off at 80%. It's just really sad the way the government looks at this.
Yeah.
And then, are you done with your audit yet, or are you still working it?
Well, I don't audit. I'm part of your management team,
Yeah.
so-called the fee accountant.
Yeah.
But your auditor for the city audits this program. I
Right.
take all my work papers and scan them
Yeah.
and give them to our auditors, and they rarely ask any financial questions. It's all testing the tenant files, that sort of stuff, so. Yeah.
All right. Well, like I say, the only concern I had with the program is whether, is it costing the city of Caribou money? Or, does it pay for itself?
Yes.
And I understand it pays for itself as far as the people are concerned that are in it, but it takes time up of other people. It takes some of Mr. Blease's time up. Because I know people call him about things. And one of the reasons I know that is because after they've called me, I've told them to call him. Because I have nothing to do with it, so.
He can answer this, but he probably says, call her. So, he can answer that, I'm sure. But I would suspect it's a very small portion of time you have to.
Unless there's informal hearings or those types of things that we have to conduct. I mean, the amount of time I have to spend dealing with Section 8 is not huge.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, the only other thing that I'd like to point out, that the other handout you got,
Yep.
in case you've never met Sue Willett, she is our FSS, which is...
Who is she?
Okay. Dave Willett's our better half, we like to tease him. She's our family sufficiency coordinator. What she does, she helps families that are on Section 8, that are eligible to go out, get jobs, get interviews. We've actually sat down, done mock interviews for some of our participants who have actually gotten jobs.
Best
We help them do
program,
I'm fully aware of what she does.
No,
She-
the only-
program HUD has ever.
She did a presentation for us here
Yeah.
one night, so.
Well, the only other thing I want to say is we're the only one in Worcester County that has this program, north of Bangor. And HUD is no longer granting PHAs as grants anymore. So if you have it, you have it. If you want it, you're not going to get it.
If you have it as long as they keep the grants coming, yeah.
Correct. And so far, Caribou has done an outstanding job. We've kept the grant because some housing authorities last year lost it for this
Yeah.
year. And she also does a home ownership program as well, which we help families get into a home with their own case. We had one lady last year, coincidentally, she moved from Limestone off to the old base, bought a house in Caribou last fall. We were only going to pay $10 of her mortgage payment, so she went off the program. But meanwhile, we helped her check her credit and get her lined up with the USDA and the mortgage lenders and the inspectors, and she's now a taxpayer, citizen of Caribou.
And bottom line, this isn't costing you pay all your own expenses, other than taking up a little space in the city office.
Besides
This
the-
isn't costing the
Correct,
city.
the space, electricity, heat.
It's all
We
in.
reimburse the city every month for internet and telephone.
Yeah.
We get reams of paper, letterhead, and envelopes from the city. We have our own photocopier that we lease. We pay for our own toner, which is part of that lease. Otherwise, we pay for our own travel, training, hotels. Our computers belong, computer maintenance, if we need it, we pay for that.
And I think the services to the landlords for keeping their apartments full and having the services, I don't think that what little bit of time would outweigh the services that they
How
get.
how do you increase the amount of rental units that you're allowed? What's it based on? Is it based on population? Is it
It's
based on?
called baseline units. You have 193.
Yeah,
And that happened over a period of years, and every once in a while, HUD in their good graces, when they were giving out new units, which rarely happens now, they would give you an increment. So you might have had 100 units at the beginning.
okay, yeah.
And actually, I got it in my file upstairs. You had 100 units, and then they, in certain year, 1998, they give you 20 more units, and then 14 more another year. And all of a sudden, you work up, we got 193 units, and that's the way it's been for probably 10 to 15 years. And they call those the baseline units. And those are what is gonna be at unless they have some more allocations.
So your wait list or nothing else would ever have any effect on whether that changes or not,
Correct.
basically?
Right.
Correct.
Yep.
But being at the 100% may help down the road.
The CMAP score, what
Yeah.
that does, it assesses the way we operate our office. Do I go back and check the files that Sue does calculations on and make sure she's doing them correctly? Are we submitting our reports to HUD on a weekly basis? Am I doing an annual report every year? And doing a 5-year annual report every year? Am I revising the administration plan, revising that, everything? It's paperwork. That's what CMAP is looking at.
The quality of the operation.
But what I'm getting at is if somebody was at 50%, they're least likely to get more.
They probably
housing.
get, you probably
some
have
taken
the
away.
OIG office, the Inspector General's office, be knocking on
If
their
you're below
door and doing
60,
an audit.
below 60, the red flag go up, the buzzers go off,
Yeah,
all sorts of stuff.
yeah. And we are allocated for 193 families are in that month. Right now, we're averaging about 185, because it's a catch-22. We're given so much money a month from HUD to spend towards HAP, Housing Assistance Payment, but yet they want us to be 100% leased. We can't do both. So we
Because the
try-
rental is more than what,
Correct, so we gotta spend all of this money, if not, they won't give it to us
Yeah.
next month.
Yeah.
So we try to lease up as many families as we can.
Balancing act.
Correct.
yeah.
So we always have families off the waiting list, they're ready today to get their voucher, so if someone goes off tomorrow, we call them in the next day, here's your voucher, go find a unit.
In 2005, they switched it. Before 2005, you could rent up as much as you want. In fact, you could even go over the
Yes.
193.
I remember that.
And you just put in a voucher and say, here's the actual housing assistance payments cost that we had for this year, and they reimburse you.
Yeah.
Well, starting in 2005, they did flat funding where they figured out how much they were gonna give you. And then they give you a little inflation every year.
Yep.
But then they tell you, like, for the funding next year, we're gonna take the months of July, August, September, what you had for leasing, and the number of, what the cost per unit per month for half payments were and stuff like that, and they project it based on those 3 months that they pick out of the preceding year, and that's what they set up for the funding for the following year for half payments. And they added 1.2% inflation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really kind of that.
Anybody else have any questions?
I have one
Yeah.
for you and for the rest of the council. Respectfully, you asked us 2 questions, why we have a public housing agency and what would happen if it closed. We hope we answered those questions for you, but I have one big question for you, and I'm asking it respectively. What would Caribou gain by closing the Caribou Housing Agency?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
You know, I never, that question never entered my mind, what we would gain.
Well, I'm just trying to understand, are you contemplating closing us down because you'd save taxes or because you'd save
No.
expenses, or, I'm just trying to understand.
No,
what
I
folks are
wanted a
gonna
better
do.
understanding, personally, I don't know about anybody else, but I want a better understanding of, does this cost the city money?
Right,
That was my question.
okay.
And at one time, I do believe that there was money allowed for space and utilities or whatever at one time.
There was money coming in quite a few years ago before, and I'll probably pronounce the word wrong, the sequestration, that we were giving excess funds to the city. We would give you the money every month towards our salaries and benefits, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. And then towards the end of the year, if we had extra money, we'd give it to the city, and the city would do as you please, if you want to call it as income, as revenue. Then the sequestration hit. A couple of years ago, we were in the red. The past couple of years, I have cut travel, Training's back. I don't go to meetings like I should every quarter, every month down in Bangor, because I can't vouch traveling clear to Bangor.
Well, it does bring another question up for me. What happens if you are in the red? What happens then?
We do the same thing like we did this year. We really cut expenses back. I mean, I cut out training, travel. Sue and I do inspections with our own personal vehicles, because a lot of Section 8 families don't like the idea of us using a city car that's marked City of Caribou to come do an inspection because of privacy. So we use our personal vehicles. We're not even reimbursing ourselves for mileage. We cut expenses like that.
The worst year was 2013, and I don't think we're gonna see another 2013 really soon. I think we're gonna be on a plane that will allow all the expenses to be reimbursed and everything like they are now in the past couple of years.
You had mentioned that there's like $4,000 or $5,000 a year kind of incidentals anyway that
It was an excess.
was in excess.
Yeah, $4,000.
If I remember correctly, yes, we overpaid. Oh, I'm sorry, Austin, go
So
ahead.
that excess goes into the housing reserve, which is on the balance sheet every month.
Okay.
Yeah, the city doesn't get it.
No, but it
It's
goes
to
in-
use
you
to
had
spend.
mentioned about the housing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if there's a year when we don't get, the HUD doesn't fund it to the level that they should, we would utilize the housing reserve. And we look at that every year, based upon what HUD's anticipating to give us. If some years go on a surplus, we might be able to get some revenue this year from that.
All right, well, we thank you for coming and answering some questions for
Before
us.
we close, on a different aspect, I jumped the gun and I want to apologize for this. If you had seen last week's Circle Publican, the Caribou Housing Agency is holding a public hearing next Friday. I apologize, I completely jumped the gun. We're holding a public hearing on our administration proposed plan for 2016. There is a copy at the desk out here, Jean, I believe, has it downstairs, which can be available. It's also on the City of Caribou's Housing Agency's website, chapter by chapter. If you're really bored, you're welcome to read it. And I've highlighted the changes. Mainly what the changes are is they're HUD mandatory. They've changed CFR numbers, Code of Federal Regulations number, and PIH numbers. There's not really there's no policy changes. Nothing that we've electively changed as HUD. So if you want me to change this, let me know. I can try to revoke it for next Friday. If not, I'll hold a public hearing. And
When is the public hearing, on Friday
next Friday, February 5th at 12 p.m.
at 12 p.m.?
At 12 p.m.
Here?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And when I hold that, I'll submit everything to Austin so we can come to you.
I'm sure there'll be a few council members here.
Okay.
Councilors are all on the board.
Yes, that is the thing. You're also the Board of Commissioners, in case you forgot. So you wear duplicate hats for us.
All right, well, thank you very much.
All
They
right.
both, by the way, these two did a great job putting together, because I reviewed the stuff and everything you need to know.